The mind behind the weapon, the SPAS-12 and the designers who blended power with fear. The October light was dying over Fornaci di Brescia when Luigi Franchi heard the sound that would define the rest of his life. Not the crack of gunfire from the proving range. He'd heard that 10,000 times. It was something quieter, more final, the metallic click of a prototype locking into semi-automatic mode, then shifting to manual pump action without jamming. He stood alone in the workshop, holding the SPAS-12, black metal, angular lines, a folding stock brutal even when retracted. The front grip formed a cage around the barrel, protective but ominous. It weighed 4.4 kilograms, heavier than any combat shotgun should be. But when he flipped the selector switch, the mechanical precision was perfect. 2 weapons in one body. Outside, in the fading autumn twilight of northern Italy's industrial heartland, the world was changing. Headlines screamed about another kidnapping in Rome, another bombing in Milan. The Red Brigades had executed Aldo Moro 18 months earlier. Germany's Red Army faction was hitting NATO bases. The Middle East was a cauldron of sudden wars fought at point-blank range in city streets, and somewhere in all that chaos, military doctrine was failing. Luigi set the prototype on the workbench and reached for technical specifications his team had compiled over 2 brutal years. Carlo Beretta's handwriting filled the margins. Stress tests, failure rates, gas pressure calculations. Enzo Pederzani had sketched the valve system that made dual-mode operation possible. Franco Nistri's metallurgy notes covered 3 pages about heat tolerance and barrel life. They'd started with a simple question: why can't a shotgun be fast and reliable? The answer was always the same: mechanically impossible. Semi-automatic shotguns use gas or recoil to cycle rounds automatically, fast but temperamental. Pump-action shotguns were brutally simple. Manual operation meant they'd work in any condition, but they were slow. In urban combat, in hostage rescue, in the tight corridors where Europe's new wars were fought, slow meant dead. Military procurement officers had rejected Luigi's proposal without reading past the first page. Shotguns are support weapons, secondary tools. We don't need innovation in a dead-end category. But Luigi had seen the casualty reports. He'd read after-action reviews from counter-terrorism units that breached buildings with rifles too long for the space and pistols too weak for the threat. He'd talked to soldiers who came back from Lebanon, from Cyprus, from urban battlefields where doctrine met reality and reality won every time. The SPAS-12 wasn't an answer to a theoretical problem. It was an answer to blood. Tomorrow, 3 officers from Komsubin, Italy's naval special forces, were coming to see a demonstration. Elite operators who'd fought in the Mediterranean, who knew exactly what failure looked like because they'd buried friends, killed by equipment that promised more than it delivered. Luigi set the weapon down and walked to the window. Below, workers were leaving for the night. The same workers whose grandfathers had built hunting shotguns for Italian nobility, whose fathers had hidden blueprints from the Nazis, whose hands carried 111 years of Franchi family history. And here he was, betting everything on a weapon that looked like something from a nightmare. He thought about his father's words. "Luigi, we make beautiful things. Why do you want to make something terrible?" Because terrible was what the world needed now. Not beautiful, not traditional. Something that could save lives by being exactly as brutal as the threats it faced. The phone rang. He let it go to silence. Tomorrow would tell the story. Either the Komsubin officers would see what he saw, a weapon that could change urban warfare doctrine, or they'd see an expensive mistake and the Franchi name would be finished. Luigi locked the workshop door and walked home through the streets of Brescia. Somewhere south, in Rome, another night of tension was beginning. Somewhere in Germany, American soldiers were securing their bases. Somewhere in the world, someone was dying because their weapon wasn't adequate. And in a locked workshop in northern Italy, a prototype shotgun sat waiting to prove everyone wrong. If stories like this make you question what you do when everyone says you're wrong but you know you're right, tell us in the comments. And stay with us for the next chapters. Part 2. Luigi Franchi was born in 1942, in the middle of a war that would shape everything. His first memories were of Allied bombers over Brescia, his mother pulling him into a cellar, his father burning blueprints so the Germans wouldn't confiscate the machinery. The Franchi family had made firearms since 1868, but Luigi never wanted to make beautiful things. He wanted to understand how things worked under pressure, how mechanisms behaved when mud clogged the action, when cold froze the springs, when the operator was terrified and shaking. At university in Milan, studying mechanical engineering, he'd become obsessed with failure analysis. He collected broken weapons and spent weekends figuring out exactly why they'd failed. Every failure told a story about the gap between what engineers promised and what soldiers actually got. By 1977, Luigi was running Franci's technical division, and Italy was burning. The Red Brigades had executed Aldo Moro, former Prime Minister, held 55 days, killed and left in a car trunk. The state had failed, the police had failed. And Luigi watched, knowing that somewhere in that failure was an equipment problem no one wanted to admit. Italian counter-terrorism units were equipped with rifles designed for open warfare, weapons 40 inches long and useless in apartment hallways. They had pistols adequate for defense, but suicidal for room clearing. They had pump-action shotguns that delivered devastating power but required manual cycling while targets shot back. There had to be something better. One night in late 1977, Luigi locked himself in his office with 3 engineers. Carlo Beretta, who understood gas systems better than anyone in Italy. Enzo Pedesani, a quiet genius with mechanical problem-solving. And Franco Nistri, whose metallurgy expertise had saved a dozen failed projects. Luigi drew a simple diagram, a shotgun with 2 operating modes, flip a switch, semi-automatic for speed, flip it back, pump action for reliability. Carlo laughed nervously. Enzo shook his head. Franco said what they were all thinking. That violates basic physics, the mechanisms conflict. Luigi stared at the drawing. So we invent the mechanism that doesn't exist yet. The first 6 months were disaster. Prototype after prototype failed in new and creative ways. The gas system bled pressure, the manual pump interfered with auto-loading, the barrel overheated. Luigi lost weight. He stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night. His wife begged him to give up. But then came the breakthrough. February 1978, 3 in the morning. Enzo Pedesani was alone in the workshop in Fornaci di Brescia, staring at the 6th failed prototype. He'd been thinking about how aircraft engines managed variable pressure, how hydraulic systems rerouted flow based on valve position. What if the selector switch physically redirected the gas flow? He sketched it quickly. A valve that, when set to semi-automatic, allowed gas to push the bolt backward automatically. When set to manual, the valve sealed completely, requiring the operator to pump manually. 2 weapons, 1 body. When Luigi saw the sketch the next morning, he knew immediately this was it. They spent 4 months fabricating a working valve system. The tolerances had to be perfect. They tested it with hundreds of rounds, different ammunition types, different temperatures, and slowly, impossibly, it started to work. By mid-1978, they had a prototype that could fire 50 rounds in semi-automatic mode, then switch to pump action and clear a jam manually, then switch back without failure. But when Luigi presented it to Army procurement, a general looked at the SPEI S-12 and said, "This isn't a weapon. This is an abomination. It looks like something from a horror film." The request for funding was denied. Luigi sat in his office afterward, holding the rejection letter. 2 years. Every hour of sleep sacrificed. Every argument with his wife, every skeptical look from his father, Enzo found him there an hour later. We failed, Luigi said quietly. No, we failed with the wrong audience. The army doesn't understand what they need, but there are people who do. He meant Comsubin, Italy's Naval Special Operations Unit, the operators who breached ships, cleared oil platforms, stormed hijacked buildings, and knew exactly what happened when your weapon wasn't adequate. Luigi made the call that afternoon. 3 months later, in October 1979, 3 Comsubin officers walked into the Franchi factory in northern Italy to see a weapon everyone said couldn't exist. Do you think you'd fight the system for what you believe works, or accept what doctrine says is impossible? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real innovation stories from history. Part 3. The demonstration was scheduled for 10 Bellis a.m., but the Comsubin officers arrived early. Luigi watched 3 men in civilian clothes step out of an unmarked car. No uniforms, no insignia, but the way they moved, efficient, aware, economical, told the whole story. The oldest one, maybe 45, had a scar running from his left ear to his collarbone. The other 2 were younger, lean, with the build of men who'd spent years swimming in the Mediterranean with rebreathers and combat knives. The officers entered without ceremony. The older one, he introduced himself only as Maggiore Renzo, shook Luigi's hand once, then turned his attention to the prototype on the workbench. He didn't touch it yet, just looked. It's heavy, he said. 4.4 kilograms loaded, heavier than standard. But it does what 2 weapons do. Show me. Luigi picked up the SPAS-12, flipped the selector to semi-automatic, and fired 8 rounds in 4 seconds. Then he switched to pump action, loaded low-pressure beanbag rounds, and fired 5 times manually. Then back to semi-automatic. 14 rounds, 3 ammunition types, 0 malfunctions. When silence settled back over the proving range, Maggiore Renzo reached for the weapon. He held it like someone who'd held 1,000 firearms and knew immediately which ones were serious. He checked the balance, tested the folding stock, examined the front grip cage. The grip, this front cage. Why? Barrel heat management and stability. The forward grip gives a second anchor point, reduces muzzle climb in rapid fire. It looks aggressive. It is, Luigi said simply. Maggiore Renzo fired 20 rounds, switched modes 3 times, deliberately induced a malfunction and cleared it manually, folded the stock and fired from compressed stance. Then he set the weapon down carefully and said, "This changes everything we know about room clearing, but the army will never adopt it. Too expensive, too complex, too far outside doctrine. You know this, yes?" "I know it. So you built it anyway." "I built it because soldiers are dying with inadequate equipment." Renzo was quiet. Then, "How many can you produce? How many do you need?" "Start with 30. Over the next 6 months, the Franchi factory in Brescia retooled an entire production line for the SPAS-12. They hired new machinists. They sourced specialized steel from mills in Terni. Every component had to be perfect. But production revealed what prototypes had hidden. The first 20 units had extractor problems. The ejectors threw hot brass into the shooter's face. The selector switch required too much force. The folding stock latch failed after 500 cycles. Luigi spent 4 months redesigning components that had worked perfectly in the prototype. By April 1980, they had 30 working SPAS-12s, delivered to Comsubin headquarters in La Spezia. And then the operators disappeared into the classified world. And Luigi heard nothing for 3 months. Those were the worst 3 months of his life. He didn't know if the weapons were being used, didn't know if they were failing, didn't know if operators were alive or dead or cursing his name. He just worked, refined production, waited. In July, Maggiore Renzo appeared unannounced. He looked older, thinner, new lines around his eyes. "We use them in an operation I can't discuss. In a country I can't name, against a target I can't describe." He paused. 6 operators, 17 hostile contacts in a 4-story building, urban environment, close quarters. And all 6 operators came home. Zero friendly casualties. The Spas performed flawlessly under conditions that would have destroyed any other shotgun we've used. He set a battered Spas 12 on Luigi's desk. The finish was worn. The stock showed impact damage. The barrel was fouled with powder residue. This weapon saved lives, but there's a problem. Luigi's stomach dropped. What problem? It terrifies people, even our own people. The operators love it. But when they carry it on base, other soldiers react like they're looking at something from hell. The appearance, the angular lines. It's not just a tool anymore, it's become a symbol. He met Luigi's eyes. You built a weapon that's as much psychological as ballistic. I don't know if that's what you intended, but that's what you've created. Luigi looked at the scarred Spas 12 on his desk and thought about his father's question from 3 years ago. Why do you want to make something terrible? Because terrible was what the world needed. And maybe that was the burden he'd carry for the rest of his life, creating something that worked perfectly and looked like a nightmare. How long can you fight for something when everyone says you're wrong, even after you're proven right? Part 4. The orders came faster than the Franchi factory could fill them. Komsubin wanted 200 more units. The Carabinieri's GIS requested 50 for evaluation. West Germany's GSG-9 inquired about procurement. Even American military observers showed up in northern Italy, taking careful notes. But Luigi couldn't celebrate. Production at scale revealed problems prototype testing never could. The gas valve system that worked flawlessly in the first 30 units started showing inconsistent behavior in mass production. Some weapons would fire 200 rounds without issue. Others failed after 50. Enzo Pedesani spent 6 weeks tracing the problem to a supplier issue. The steel blanks were coming from 2 different mills, Brescia and Terni, with slightly different metallurgical properties. Temperature changes caused micro-expansion rates to vary by fractions of a millimeter, enough to matter. They switched to a single supplier and retested every weapon. 43 units failed and had to be rebuilt. Then came the legal problem. An Italian prosecutor in Milan noticed the Spas 12 fell into a regulatory grey area. Semi-automatic, but also pump action. The folding stock made it technically a short-barreled weapon in some jurisdictions. The front grip could be interpreted as a combat feature, civilian law prohibited. The prosecutor filed paperwork to freeze Franchi's manufacturing license. Luigi spent 3 months explaining to bureaucrats why the Spas 12 wasn't a threat to public safety, why it was designed for professional operators, why features that looked aggressive were functional necessities. The case was dismissed in January 1981, but the legal scrutiny created unexpected publicity. Newspapers ran stories about Italy's controversial combat shotgun. Photos appeared in firearms magazines across Europe. Some articles praised it as revolutionary, others condemned it as unnecessarily brutal. Franco Nistri showed Luigi an article from a German publication. The headline, "The shotgun that looks like fear itself." "Is this good or bad for us?" Franco asked. Luigi didn't have an answer. What he did have was a growing folder of field reports from Komsubin operators, classified documents Renzo discreetly passed to him. The reports were clinical, technical, but between the lines, Luigi read the real story. An oil platform retaken from hijackers in the Adriatic, a hostage rescue in an embassy, a counter-terrorism operation in a residential building, situations where precision mattered as much as power. In every report, 0 weapon malfunctions, 0 friendly fire incidents. The Spas 12 was doing exactly what Luigi designed it to do, but his father still wasn't speaking to him. One evening in February 1981, Luigi found his father in the old workshop, hand-finishing a walnut stock for a custom sporting piece. They stood in silence, the only sound the rasp of file against wood. "Your weapon is famous now," his father finally said. "It saves lives. It also ends them. Every weapon does. At least this one is honest about it." His father set down the stock. When I was your age, hiding blueprints from the Nazis, I promised myself that when the war ended, I would only make beautiful things. Things that reminded people civilization existed, not tools for killing. The war never ended, Papa. It just changed shape. That's what frightens me, that you believe that. Luigi didn't argue. There was no point. By May 1981, the first international sale went through. 200 SPAS-12s to an undisclosed Middle Eastern security force. Then a contract with the South American National Police Unit, then interest from Asian Special Operations Groups. The weapon that started as Luigi's obsession in Brescia was spreading across the world, and with it, a reputation. In training facilities from Germany to Brazil, when operators first saw the SPAS-12, they had the same reaction. A moment of hesitation, recognition that this was something different, not just a tool, a statement. Some instructors loved it. Others refused to use it, said it was too aggressive, sent the wrong message. But the operators, the ones who'd breached doors and cleared rooms and faced armed threats at conversational distance, they understood immediately. The SPAS-12 wasn't designed to look friendly. It was designed to work when nothing else would. By 1983, Luigi had received 3 death threats from anti-weapon activists. He'd also received 2 letters from operators whose lives had been saved by the weapon's reliability. He kept all 5 letters in a locked drawer and told no one they existed. What would you sacrifice to create something that works, even if the world can't decide whether to thank you or condemn you for it? Part 5. The call came in August 1984, 5 years after that first demonstration in Brescia. A quiet voice, with an American accent, from a number that didn't appear on any exchange, asked Luigi if he could fly to Virginia for an evaluation matter. The facility was unmarked, somewhere west of Quantico, surrounded by forest and security that made clear this wasn't a courtesy visit. Luigi was escorted through 3 checkpoints to a conference room where 2 FBI hostage rescue team operators were waiting. On the table, a SPAS-12, serial number traced to 1982 production. One operator, he introduced himself only as Scott, picked up the shotgun and spoke with precision. "We've been testing this weapon for 18 months. Urban scenarios, rural scenarios, vehicle assaults, building entries, low light conditions, extreme temperatures. We've put it through more rounds than any other shotgun in our inventory." He paused. "And it's never failed. Not once. We've used buckshot, slugs, breaching rounds, less lethal options, and it cycles everything without hesitation." Luigi waited. There was a but coming. "But we have a problem. Half our instructors love it, call it the most reliable combat shotgun ever made. The other half refuse to adopt it because of how it's perceived." Perceived how? The first time you see a SPAS-12, it doesn't look like law enforcement equipment. It looks like something from a nightmare. America is struggling with questions about police militarization. This weapon has become a symbol in that debate. The second operator spoke. "For what it's worth, everyone who's actually used it in the field wants to keep it. It's the people who've never carried it who want it gone." "So what are you asking me?" "We're asking if there's a way to make it less threatening without compromising the mechanism." Luigi looked at the battle-worn SPAS-12 on the table, perfect and honest, and realized he was being asked to solve a problem he'd never anticipated. The weapon worked too well, looked too honest, scared people who needed to believe violence could be controlled by making it look controlled. No, there isn't. The front cage protects the barrel and provides a forward grip. The folding stock allows transition between vehicle deployment and building entry. Every feature that makes it look aggressive exists because it has to exist for the weapon to function. So we're stuck with it as is. You're stuck with what you asked for, a shotgun that works in any condition. If you want something that looks friendly, buy a hunting gun and paint it blue. But don't ask me to compromise function for aesthetics." Scott smiled slightly. "That's what I told my superiors. How did they respond?" "They approved procurement of 50 more units." Over the next 2 years, the SPAS-12 appeared in more specialized units worldwide. Hong Kong Police, Brazilian BOPI, French GIGN, units that operated where failure wasn't acceptable, but it also appeared in Hollywood. The first time Luigi saw the SPAS-12 in a movie, it was 1984, a science fiction action film about a cyborg assassin. The weapon appeared for maybe 90 seconds, fired from the hip, used as a symbol of future warfare and mechanized brutality. And just like that, the SPAS-12 became something else, a cultural icon of fictional violence. Luigi watched the film in a Milan theater and felt something break inside. He'd spent years designing a tool to save lives, and now it was entertainment, a prop, a symbol divorced from reality. "It's just a movie," Enzo said afterward. "It's never just a movie." Now everyone who sees this weapon will think of cyborgs and apocalypse instead of operators coming home alive. Does that change what it actually does? No, but it changes what people think it means. By 1987, the SPAS-12 had appeared in a dozen films, 20 video games, countless television shows. Always the weapon of choice for villains, for dystopian soldiers, for anyone representing brutal, uncompromising force. Production sales actually increased because of the exposure. But the weapon's reputation became impossible to separate from its fictional representation. Military and law enforcement units started requesting their SPAS-12s be kept out of public photos. Too controversial, too recognizable. Meanwhile, in Luigi's locked drawer, the stack of letters kept growing, half from activists condemning him, half from operators thanking him for creating a tool that saved their lives. He read all of them, answered none. In 1989, Luigi stepped back from day-to-day operations at the franchise factory. He was 47, exhausted, no longer sure what victory looked like. The SPAS-12 was in service with over 50 agencies across 6 continents. It had been proven in combat, counter-terrorism, hostage rescue. It had never failed when it mattered, but it was also a villain in popular culture, a symbol of everything people feared about modern violence. His father died that year, never having reconciled with Luigi's choice to abandon beautiful craftsmanship for functional brutality. At the funeral, Maggiore Renzo appeared briefly and said only, "He would have been proud eventually. Some men just need more time than a lifetime provides." Luigi didn't cry, he just nodded. What does it mean when you create something perfect that the world can't decide how to remember? Part 6. The SPAS-12 entered its twilight in the late 1990s, not because it failed, not because better technology replaced it, but because the world changed again. New shotgun designs appeared, simpler, lighter, easier to train on. The Benelli M4 offered semi-automatic reliability without dual-mode complexity. The Remington 870 remained the standard pump-action workhorse. Gradually, special operations units that had relied on the SPAS-12 began transitioning to weapons easier to maintain, easier to explain, easier to defend in public relations battles. By 2000, Franchi had stopped producing the SPAS-12, not officially discontinued, just quietly allowed to fade. The tooling was mothballed. The specialized machinists moved to other projects. Luigi was 58. He'd spent 23 years living with the consequences of his obsession. He still received letters occasionally. Veteran operators writing years after retirement, saying they remembered the SPAS-12 as the weapon that gave them confidence, when confidence was the difference between action and paralysis. One letter, from a former Komsubin operator, arrived in 2003. "I carried your shotgun in 7 operations across 3 continents. I never loved it. It was too heavy, too aggressive, too honest about what it was designed to do. But I trusted it completely. And there's a night in Mogadishu when I'm alive, because the CPAS fired 15 rounds in conditions that would have killed any other weapon. I wanted you to know. It mattered." Luigi kept that letter separate from all the others. In 2008, A museum curator from the Italian Military Museum in Rome contacted Luigi about a SPAS-12 they'd acquired for their modern warfare collection. Would he provide historical context? Luigi visited on a cold November afternoon. The SPAS-12 was displayed behind glass, labeled Italian Combat Shotgun, Dual Mode Operation, 1979-2000, with brief description of its technical innovations. Next to it, on a small placard, a quote attributed to an unnamed veteran, "The weapon that changed how we thought about close combat." Luigi stood looking at it for a long time. An old man now, 76, thinking about the younger version of himself who'd stayed up until 3 in the morning in a workshop in Brescia, convinced he could solve a problem everyone said was unsolvable. Had he been right? Yes. The weapon worked. It saved lives. It changed doctrine. Had he been wrong? Also yes. He'd created something that became a symbol when all he'd wanted was a tool. A young couple passed by the display. The woman said, "That's the shotgun from those movies." "The scary one." They moved on without reading the placard. Luigi almost laughed. He left the museum and walked through Rome's autumn streets, thinking about Maggiore Renzo, dead in 2005, cancer, about Enzo and Carlo and Franco, all retired, scattered across Italy, occasional Christmas cards, about his father, 20 years gone, still disapproving in memory, about his wife, patient beyond reason, still asking, "Do you regret it?" At home that evening, he wrote a letter he would never send. "I spent 3 years creating a weapon that terrified people as much as it protected them. I thought if I could make something that worked perfectly, the world would understand why it had to exist. I was naive." The SPAS-12 worked exactly as designed. It changed how special operations units approached close combat. It saved lives. Every technical goal I set was achieved. But I learned something unexpected. Perfection isn't enough. A tool is only as good as the world's ability to understand why it exists. And when you create something that works by being honest about what violence requires, the world decides you've created a monster. Maybe I did. Maybe the weapon that looks like fear is just fear made visible, and people can't forgive you for showing them what they prefer to hide. I don't regret the engineering. I regret thinking that solving the problem was the same as solving the question. He filed the letter in his desk drawer, next to all the others. The SPAS-12 remained in service with scattered units for another decade. Occasionally, one would appear in news photos. A counter-terrorism operation in Manila, a drug raid in Sao Paulo, a security detail in Baghdad. In 2018, at 86, Luigi Franchi sat in his workshop in Brescia, the same workshop where his great-grandfather had crafted hunting shotguns, where his father had hidden blueprints from Nazis, where he'd first sketched the impossible dual-mode system. The workshop was quiet now, no production, just an old man surrounded by drawings and memories. On the workbench, a single SPAS-12, serial number 0001, the very first production unit, returned to him years ago by Komsubin as a gesture of respect. He picked it up one last time, felt its weight, heard the mechanical precision of the selector switch moving between modes. It still worked perfectly. He set it down and thought about what Renzo had said decades ago. "You built a weapon that's as much psychological as ballistic." Maybe that was the truth. The SPAS-12 succeeded not just because it worked, but because it looked like it worked, because it refused to pretend violence was anything other than what it was, because it was honest, and maybe honesty in a weapon is the thing people can least forgive. Luigi died in 2019, quietly, at home, surrounded by family who loved him even though they never fully understood his obsession. The SPAS-12 outlived him, still appearing occasionally in specialized arsenals, still carried by operators who trusted it absolutely, still misunderstood by a world that knew it from movies. In the end, it wasn't the weapon that endured. It was the question Luigi spent his life answering. What do you do when you know you're right, when the thing you've created works perfectly, but the world can't decide whether to thank you or condemn you for creating it. He never found a satisfying answer. But he never stopped trying to build things that mattered. And in some workshop, somewhere in the world, another engineer is probably asking the same impossible question, holding a prototype everyone says can't work, believing anyway. If this story reminded you that changing the world often means being right before anyone believes you, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.